Good afternoon, and welcome to the next presentation in ACWR's 2022 Leadership-Centered Webinar Series. I am Casey Bowser, current president of ACWR, and I will serve as the moderator for this session entitled Spectrum of Fulfillment, Strategic Approaches for Archivists and Leadership in Charism Transmission. Our speakers today will offer sensible and strategic solutions to readying an archive to serve as the final act of charism and ministry transition. But before I introduce our lovely speakers, let's review a few housekeeping rules. Please remain muted over the course of the presentation. If you have questions, please submit them in the chat or wait until the conclusion of the presentation and use the raise hand function in the reactions section of your screen. Our speakers will address comments and questions at the conclusion of the webinar. Please also note that this presentation is being recorded and will be available for later viewing on the ACWR website. I am pleased now to introduce our speakers, Sister Sharon Casey and Lisa Schell. Between 2010 and 2019, Sister Sharon Casey served as both president and archivist for the Dominican Sisters of Tacoma. Since July 2019, she has served as archivist for the community. She joined ACWR in 2010 and has learned much from the wisdom of her colleagues. The archives are a major part of the spiritual patrimony of the congregation. It is the responsibility of both leadership and archivists to work together to preserve the legacy. As a congregation comes to fulfillment, it is critical for archivists and leadership to work together in preparing the archives for a permanent repository. Sister Sharon is in a unique position to understand the similarities and differences between the work of leaders and the archivist. Thank you, Sister Sharon, for joining us today and supporting ACWR for many years. Since 2018, Lisa M. Schell has served as the congregation archivist for the Adrian Dominican Sisters Archive, managing, preserving, and purifying a dynamic collection, and as an engaged member of the ACWR community. As an information ambassador, she values the intersection between professionalizing women religious archives, the invaluable and transformative stories of sisters as subject matter experts in sharing their lived experiences, and the delicate balance between privacy and access. She believes that archiving is an expression of storytelling and congregational charism, and can only be successfully achieved when both lay archivists and sisters align in mission. Lisa, thank you for so graciously agreeing to bring this important presentation to the archivists and leaders in attendance today. I've been working with Lisa closely over the past several months, and I am confident in Lisa's vision as the next president of ACWR. She is currently serving as the vice president. This webinar offered by Sister Sharon and Lisa is a significant step forward in strategizing a future for women religious archives. And we hope this is but the first step. Now, I will turn it over to our esteemed speakers.
Thank you so much, Casey, and thank you everyone for being here. We're going to get right into it. We have a lot of ground to cover, so I hope we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. If not, we welcome you to stay on for a few more minutes, and you please feel free to use the chat as was introduced early. Okay.
Oh, excuse me, Lisa, you need to unmute.
Sorry, there we go. Okay. Welcome everybody. My name is Lisa Schell, and I'll kick off the webinar today. I'm going to outline our objectives, and then Sister Sharon and I will go back and forth on the rest of the presentation. First off, we really did want to model how to do this moving forward, because there's a lot of challenges ahead of us, and we see the value in having multiple perspectives. And so between the two of us, we hope that there will be something for everybody in this presentation, whether you are sitting here as a leader as a sister archivist or even as a lay archivist. We also appreciate the fact that what we're going to introduce today is not something unfamiliar to any of you, although we are calling it or branding it the spectrum of fulfillment. And we hope by using that framework with some very specific parameters that we can more easily deconstruct the overwhelming feeling of what to do with the archive. And so we're really hoping that, not that we're offering a simple solution, but a structured one that we'd like to use to launch into something more robust that we hope to use forward in a working group, which we'll talk about. So for today, what you're going to learn or hear are the different voices. So between Sister Sharon and I, you're going to hear from leadership and archivist, from sister archivists, from lay archivists. She represents a small community of 34 sisters. I represent a large community of 445 sisters. She is a solo archivist. I have a large staff of hired staff as well as volunteers and student college graduates working interns. We also, like I said, want to model this engagement, having both of us coming to the table and talking about this very important topic, as well as offer tested and dream state solutions. And then of course, out of this, we really do hope that down the road, this will launch us into something more robust where we can put some guidelines, some documentation together that will serve to support not only leaders, but also archivists on how to move us all forward. So Sister Sharon is going to kick this off by asking the big questions. Sister Sharon?
Lisa, there are two big questions, and from the leadership perspective and the archivist perspective, and they're similar, but there are subtle differences and nuances. Leadership will be asking, how well do the archivists tell the story of the congregation charism? An archivist will be saying to leadership, from your perspective, what does a successful legacy look like to you? And how do you envision the final project? They have the great big picture, the overall. The archivist has the more focused and detailed pictures. Thanks, Lisa.
Great. Okay. So this is the slide that this whole presentation is built around. I entered this professional space 4 years ago, and about 3 years ago, I chaired the Dominican Archivists and Collaboration Summit. And what became very clear to me out of that, and through various conversations with archivists and leadership, is that I needed to think about what I was doing much more strategically. We are asked as a community to not only come in and manage a collection, but simultaneously, every decision that we make around appraisal, collection development, deaccessioning needs to, the central piece of that also needs to consider fulfillment. And so that is something very different than most of us understand from our colleagues who are in academic archives or any experience we had as getting an archival degree if you're a layperson. And so this idea that the stark reality is our collections and our job have a shelf life. And so how do we move forward as a community knowing that? How do we strategically prepare ourselves for the inevitable? And so I come from a background in not only academic, but corporate archiving. And so I took this on very much from a project management approach. And so one of the ways that made sense to me, and again, this is very not necessarily tested, but I am debuting this model as a way to sort of to get us all thinking about how it is possible that we can bring leaders and archivists together to manage the archives that feels less overwhelming, is less overwhelming, manages the challenges in a very precise, lean, and strategic way, and allows us to be creative at the same time. And so I'm challenging everybody here today to think of archiving moving forward in 3 different buckets. If you have 5 years left, there are what I'm calling essential archiving. You are falling into the essential archiving camp, which is to say, you don't have a lot of runway. There's things that you need to do. And what we're saying as archivists, these are the things you need to do. If you want to ready the collection, these are sort of the bare minimums that need to happen. We'll talk about those. The middle bucket, which is where I think many of us land, is 6 to 10 years. And again, these can be shifted and moved, but I just, I have to draw some lines in the sand. But that middle group, I'm calling strategic archiving, which is to say you have a little bit more room. You have more time, presumably you have more funding, more support. You can do more. You can curate content. You can go out and collect content. You can develop digital projects. You can do more with outreach. And so you just have a little bit more wiggle room than you would the previous group. And keep in mind, everything that happens before, I'm assuming, has already happened. So you get to the last group, which is where I fall under 10 plus years. And then what you are able to do is do what's called radical archiving. You are pioneering. You are able to do some really interesting things around outreach, reaching out to communities that may not necessarily know about the treasures of your archive, doing something called field archiving, going out and collecting. We're always trying to figure out how to get rid of stuff, but actually going out and filling in the gaps. So there's some real possibilities in what that extra time gives you. And so not only being able to understand this framework, but devise it in a way that we can look specifically at what are the roles and responsibilities of leaders versus archivists, and also what's possible. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Sister Sharon.
Oh, Lisa talked about the spectrum here. I'm going to talk about what if you have 5 years or less, or maybe even 2 years or less. And at this stage, depending on whether your community has engaged a lay professional archivist or whether you're still a sister archivist who may or may not be trained, each brings their own perspective and their own strength. The lay professional archivist probably brings the expertise, the technical know-how to organize the archives. On the other hand, the sister archivist is probably an expert in the culture and history of the community. The ideal duo would be if there were at least one of each. So I'm speaking as somebody, and mine is more of a personal and case study. I'm speaking as someone who's been in leadership on and off for 26 years. So during these years, I have had the opportunity to know what's in the archives, but not necessarily what you do with them, other than needing a paper here or there for something. Also, ago when I started in leadership in 1981, I knew what was in them, but I had no idea. We never dreamed that we were thinking of moving the archives. Back then we thought, they're always going to be with us in Tacoma someplace. And as we move forward, we find that is not the case. As Lisa said, I'm from a small community. We are now down to 34. We were 250 at our largest, so we were never a huge community. We also have a commissary now since 2019, and we're in a covenant relationship with the Sisters of Providence. So we are definitely on the downside of the slope. In 2019, we made the decision that our archives would be transferred to the University of Santa Clara in California. And we did this after considering what were the options that were becoming available, how close to home did we want them, did it make any difference whether we were with all Dominicans or not. And so when Santa Clara offered the invitation to begin to want to house archives from other communities, we felt this was the best solution for us. And I'm also going, as I speak, going to be talking through the lens of 5 years or less remaining in your archives. So if you're Lisa's community size and have more time, just know that it's coming. If you're in the 5 years or less, you'll understand. Next slide, please. Questions to consider for the last 5 years. And hopefully some of these have already been completed. what is already completed in your archives? Are the basics done, record groups, organization? Has the sorting been completed so the documents are in the correct buckets? And I just recently found annals from our postulate in Ireland, which we never knew we had. We reopened it in 1950, right after World War II, and we thought they were lost forever. Lo and behold, sorting some financial boxes last week, I found the whole set of archives from 1950 to 1965 when we closed it. So even if you're down to the 5 years, don't assume that everything is necessarily in the right place. So I'm at a point where I'm really going through everything just to make sure we don't have things like annals in with financial records. It gives you an idea of your completion. You might say, well, why do I need to know the size of my community? Because it can move very quickly when we're at the last stage. We went from like 49 to 34 in about 4 years. So it moves very quickly. And I would say, expect the unexpected. Number 7 is important because at this stage, your volunteers need to have specific tasks. So the archivist needs to be the leader or the driver in this. As we all know, archive work is detailed and focused, and that's not everybody's gifts. They may be willing, they may want to help, but that is not their gift. And there's something though for everyone. For example, we have a lot of small pictures that need to be taken out of the frames. I have one sister, that's all she does. She comes down when I need pictures taken out of the frames. And that's all. Oh, on the other hand, I have somebody from a former leadership person come in to help me sort deceased and former members because we don't know exactly what's in those files. So considering who can do the best in terms of your help. Documents that will be retained at your site for a certain number of years. For example, we will probably move our archives in about 3 years. However, we will not complete our mission for probably another 10 or 15. So there may be some files that we would keep in Tacoma or hopefully housed with the Sisters of Providence, because by that time, most of us will probably be in their retirement facility. But, and then another question that came up when Lisa and I were talking is, do you still have sponsored ministries or schools that you have to consider, that you need their records? We have taken care of our schools because we haven't had them for a number of years. So that was one of the first things we did, was to do our schools, and we do not have any sponsored ministries. So that part was taken care of. And again, is the time frame flexible? Again, expect the unexpected. Don't lock in your date and say, on this day at this time, we are going to move the archives. Next slide, please. Leadership. Make life easier for leadership. That's the key to this slide. Our leadership, and archives are important, and I'm going to speak as a leader now. Archives are important, but they can't always be the number one priority. Whereas for the archivist, archives are the number one priority. So in the last 5 years, it's really important that the archivist and leadership not be strangers to each other, because we will probably be archivists when leadership changes. And new leadership may or may not know what's in the archives. If it's somebody who has not been in any leadership capacity before, this may be a whole new experience for them. So I would say of the archives, so they at least know what is in there and what they can find. Whoops, thank you. Somebody said the speaker is cutting out. Please, thank you. One of the areas where leadership and, oh God, I'm going to ask a question now. Can everyone hear me? I'm cutting out for many people. Okay. Leadership and archivists can work together in many areas. The leadership can delegate authority, but it needs to be clear. What is leadership delegating to the archivist to doing what he or she needs to do? Particularly in the areas of artifacts, community history, art done by members. The archivist may have recommendations. Leadership may not even know who the members were who did this work. So this is really critical. Probably, unless we all have huge repositories to go to, we probably don't have room to take, Sister X's 100 pictures that she painted. So you have to make some decisions. It's also important to work with leadership with regard to confidential files. Where will they be housed? Will they go down to the new repository? Will they stay with the congregation or whatever? If you're lucky, you don't have lots of confidential files, but whether you have a few or many, it's important to decide how and what you're going to do with that. I think I've already talked, if the major superior is appointed as commissary, it's important that they tour the archives also, because obviously they would not know them. So trust and cooperation and working together are important. And to schedule a regular meeting with leadership, which may only be twice a year at this point, or maybe it's quarterly, but it is important to document it. And I know in talking with some archivists, they find the best way is to give a written update to leadership. And I think that is good. But if you can also meet in person, that's even better. But again, leadership wants to be available for the archives, but don't always have the time. And I know from my own experience, I am cutting out. I know from my own experience, if I had a meeting with the archivist and then a sister suddenly had an accident and had to go to the hospital, the archive meeting got rescheduled. So leadership always has the items on their plate that will take archives, not because they aren't interested, but just because there is not enough time. And as I said, I was fortunate with all my years in leadership to know what was in the archives, but not what to do with them. And here's where I found mentoring. If you're a new archivist and you're a sister archivist, networking is the best thing you can do. Make friends with your regional archivists. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And the last thing is, what if you need to be replaced? I'm going to share a little anecdote here. The person who is replacing you, now I'm speaking if we replace a religious archivist. I'm assuming if we hire a lay archivist, she would be professional. But it depends on who and what you need. You don't want to replace it with a nice lady who visits the sister and goes to mass with you once a month and says, how can I help? And you don't want the sister who has no interest in the archives. So you need somebody who is able and willing, organized, able to work independently. And it helps, but it's not necessary if the person has an interest in history. Another anecdote. While I was in leadership, we had a sister who retired from the archives, and she had done very good work for a number of years. So we needed to replace her, and there was Sister X who did not have a job. She wanted a job. She loved the community. She was a very helpful person. So we appointed her the archivist. Well, for 10 years, very, very little was done in the archives. She had no interest in it. She didn't know what to do. She went to a few webinars. She went to a few conferences, but it didn't seem to help. But no gift was hospitality. She loved to help people. She loved to be the one to take care of refreshments at parties. So no matter how desperate you are for an archivist, if the shoe fits, there needs to be that little bit of able and willing to learn, but also able to do this. He is connecting with the director of where the archives are going. And initially, when we made the decision to transfer our archives to Santa Clara, I met with the archivist at Santa Clara to discuss the parameters, the specifications. This has not happened, if this has not happened previously. It was really helpful because I had a sense then of how this would be organized and what I needed to do to get them ready to move to Santa Clara. Nadia Nazir, who is the archivist there, she and I now meet every other month to discuss my project progress and for her to answer any questions I have about organizing resources. One of the things I have found is there are similarities in preparing archives, but each repository has subtle differences. So it's good to do work with where they are going so that yours are completed in the way that they would like and that they will be stored. I also use Nadia to ask questions. For example, I'm sure we all have those heavy ledgers. I'm sure we all have those special ledgers that have from our early days that have really heavy black covers. Well, they take up a lot of space. So talking with Nadia, she suggested removing the black covers and using a certain kind of cotton twine to bind them. And so consequently, I'm going to have 3 boxes instead of about 7 from all those old ledgers. That was something I wouldn't have thought of, but she was very helpful in that way. Also, if you are a Charism-based community, make use of your Charism archivists. I make use of mine freely. I also freely consult Ellen Pierce as well as Nadia because Ellen brings the dimension of charism, but I also relate with our regional archivists. For example, Loretta Green in Seattle with the Providence Sisters and Sarah Cantor, the Holy Name Sisters. Again, very helpful and very willing. So don't be afraid to call or email if you have a question. Next slide. As archivists, we are carriers of the vision, and each repository has its own guidelines, but they all are geared or focused on preserving our heritage and our charism. And that's what we want to always keep before us. How are we preserving our history and charism? Archivists, leaders, all have specific functions unique to each. It's important not to forget membership when you're in the last 5 years. Don't spring it on them when the moving company is coming. If you're communities, we all have people who some need to know ahead of time, some are happy to know when it moves, but keep membership informed. And we also want to tell our stories so that it will remain timeless. We want to ensure that our legacy will be passed on. For my own community, a key question for members has been, will we be able to access the archives if they're away in California? Is anyone able to get them? And will they be safe? Those seem to be the 3 important pieces. My community is happy that we're moving them to Santa Clara, but they do have a few concerns and want to know what's going to happen. I also have a committee that works with me in identifying how our ministries and charism will be remembered. And I think if you're in a small community, it's easier to do, but it can also be done in a large community because members bring a great sense of their history and their remembrance of community. Now, we are fortunate, if you in the slide, the people that we sold our mother house to have been very friendly with us. And when we wanted to preserve some history in Tacoma, they offered us a room in our former mother house, which they even renovated for us. So we are able to have a heritage room that will remain in Tacoma even long after we are gone. So those are some thoughts from a novice archivist, but who does bring the experience of both leadership and archivist. So Lisa, take it away.
Thank you, Sister Sharon. And I would like to pick up by diving back into the framework. And thank you so much for outlining a real life, in real time example of how this actually looks and works, because this is one of the things that I think within our professional community, including ACWR, we are most interested in doing is curating these stories, these case studies, so that we can, in fact, link people together to help them connect the dots, because that's what this whole framework is built on. It's the idea that if you're in the 5-year bucket, you are talking to people who are in the 5-year bucket, and you are gaining that experience and that wisdom from what they are also experiencing at the same time in real time. So thank you for that. So I just want to preface this by saying I am obviously a lay archivist. I've been doing this for 4 years, and whatever I have to say about leadership is coming from the cheap seat. So I just want to preface that. But from the people that I've talked to in leadership and from archivists, these I hope will help close the gaps a little bit, and I hope will be able to help us really fine tune our approach. So from my perspective, I think this is what's possible or essential to what archiving can look like and how it can be successful within a 5-year span or less. So the first thing I would like to say is for both archivists and leadership, and Sister Sharon did a really good job outlining this, the relationship is extremely important, not only between the archivist and leadership, but leveraging the relationships that you have independently of that relationship. So leaders could be leveraging and building relationships to other consortiums, other leaders, other institutions from previous ministries, as well as the archivists can be reaching out to their archival community to do the same. I think that's really key, because remember the 3 things I said at the beginning, I think that will help make this transition as seamless as possible is resourcing, funding, and relationship building, community. And this is where it all starts. Support and secure funding for the archival program and have a plan. It's the archivist's job to come up with solutions and finding aids and what's in the archive and what should be kept, but it's really the leadership team who decides on the funding of that program. So that's where leadership can come in and help accelerate and actualize a plan. There are 3 things there. If you take nothing away, I think there are 3 things that absolutely need to be done at this stage if you are facing turning out the lights sooner rather than later. And those are ideally a final archival policy and procedural plan. You do not want a non-vowed member making decisions about what is accessible or not accessible in your collection. So having really clear guidelines. I've heard it once described that sister records are like HR records. So being able to really put the intellectual and physical wrappers and restrictions that protect privacy in a way that is super clear in that transfer, I think is extremely important. And that decision needs to come from leadership. Secondly, alongside of that, not only the policies, but what the archivist is really good at is arranging and describing. So at the very least, we typically use an archival standard or approach called MPLP, which basically allows us to archive at a very high level without getting too much in the weeds. And so it's more product, less process is what that stands for. And it allows the archivist to really get the collection in a state that no matter who receives it, they're going to basically know what's in this box or what's in this folder. And the last thing, which I think is really, really critical at this stage, is what is the approved story of congregation charism? If you have a congregation history book, if you have micro histories about your ministries, even better. But if there's not something written, that somehow needs to be documented and transferred. On the flip side, I've already mentioned a couple of these. The responsibility of the archivist is to do the work and work very closely with leadership and her professional community to be able to ready this collection. But again, at the very least, policies, the story, and the finding aids are critical at this stage. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, if your landing area is a little bit longer, a little bit wider, then you can do a few more things. And so if I could offer to leadership, I think one of the opportunities you have at this stage is to broker a relationship between the archive and the primary administrative stakeholders. So do you have a workflow? Do you have a records management workflow from finance, from development, from communications back to the archive? Do you have a regular deposit scheduled for transfer? And I'm thinking of the three big content creators in any congregation are typically development, communications, and leadership. So are you actively, proactively making sure that that transfer is happening? It's standardized and everybody understands that that's to be expected. I think one of the things that we often miss about archives is we only think of the dusty old things with stories. And when we have an opportunity to archive is not only managing the history and the backlog and the old stuff, but when you have this opportunity of 6 to 10 years, you should be responsibly archiving the stuff that is being created now, the history in the making now. So you can move the mountain from both ends, if you will. One way to do that is to secure a digital program, whether through digitization or managing digital-born content. And then, of course, from a leadership perspective, the best way to do that is to secure a budget. Make sure that there's a proper staffing model in place. Do we need more volunteers? Can we start up an internship program? And all of these, I mean, everything is possible, right? And I know there's so many constraints and restrictions, as Sister Sharon shared, but there's a community that you can draw from, and we're here. And so no matter what stage you are in fulfillment, there is support. It's just matching the right person to the right project, as Sister Sharon so adequately talked about. From an archivist perspective, it is getting those deposits standardized and formalized, actively procuring content, possibly having an archival content management system established, working closely with IT and all the related departments that would support that. Anticipating the needs. So what I would say is, as an archivist, our job is to make leadership's job easier. As an archivist, our job is to anticipate what are the historical questions, needs of our community, the people that we serve. We are in a service industry. The people that call and ask us questions are patrons. So how are we making the archive come alive and be relevant and make it curious to people, not only internally, but also people outside of our community, which is much more possible in the final stage. And then, of course, purifying collections, which is different than processing collections. As an archivist, it is also your responsibility to get through your backlog. But if you are writing a collection, you should be deduping, removing staples, rusty, paper clips, rubber bands, making sure that there's not duplicates across collections. So you are skinning the collection. You are making it lean and mean. You are only saving the essential because you can't save it all, right? But it's your job to decide what's most important. And I'll share a quick little story. One of the biggest ways that I determine what my collection policy is going to be is I look back at what are my past questions. So in the 4 years I have been here, I can tell you right now that social justice issues are going to be what researchers in the future are going to be most interested in. And I'll talk about in the next segment what that can potentially look like. And then, of course, be active, fully participant member. There are lots of local, regional, and national professional organizations to belong to. Okay, if you have the luxury of time, as I fortunately do, I think this is not only what's possible, but you are in a position to be a responsible leader. So from a leadership perspective, and we're already engaging this right now. I see Sister Rita's on the call. Hello, Sister Rita. You can loan your archivists to other communities to support their transition, whether they go there for a couple days or for a week. This is one approach that I think could be very, very valuable. It's a way of giving back to the community. You can support congregation histories, projects, exhibits. Actually, what you can do is initiate them. Where are the holes and gaps in telling the story? You could support those types of projects. You could actually fly secular scholars to your community on a stipend or a scholarship to research interesting collections in your archive that may have never been studied before. And I'm talking only about public collections, of course, but there are all kinds of ways to think about this. And lastly, you could serve as a model, as a leader to other leaders on how to do this successfully, which is why the conversation between leadership and archivists is so incredibly important. On the flip side, the archivist, you could actually, I know this is radical archiving, it's hard to think of this, but you can actually go and find content and bring it back to the mother house. And I've seen this done with sister artwork. We talk so much about getting rid of things, but what if we don't have a representation of a sister? How do we get that? We go back to family, donors, sponsors and institutions. Maybe it's hanging on the school cafeteria. We can bring that home back to the mother house. Be a leader in the community. Since you have the bandwidth, presumably you have funding, you have the support, you can offer up your time and expertise to other communities. Be able to develop really robust finding aids that are online and searchable. You can provide the education and the programming for how to do this successfully. And lastly, it's really, I think if you do have this bandwidth, you're able to do what I call, you're not just processing and curating, or you're not just processing and exhibiting, but you are curating. And this brings me to my story. So in one of the very first questions I got when the pandemic hit is, what did we do? What did the leadership do in 1918 when the pandemic hit, when the Spanish flu hit? The next question I got in 2020 is, what did we do as we're getting ready to celebrate women's right to vote? And the last one is, what did we do as a community in Adrian to respond to the KKK activity in Adrian? How did we respond to that? In other words, what side of history are we on? And how have we responded to these social justice issues? And right now, the big issue is Native American boarding schools. And it's something that we are very engaged in. And so I'm always looking for wow content, whether it's a photograph or an article or a quotation that I know really speaks to these issues that one day I'm guessing, and I just flag, I don't curate them into a collection, but I know where those are. I know where the treasures are buried. And so, but until you're out, as long as you're not in survival mode, you have the bandwidth to think more globally about your collection. And what I would say to leadership is your archive proactively reaching out to you? Is your archivist able to manage these types of research requests? Are they coming to you to make your job easier? And if they're not, what can we do to shore up those gaps and make your archive more successful? Okay, real quick. How do we get there? I said partnerships, funding, and resources. Partnerships. ACWR, thank you, Casey Bowser, for putting this together. This is one of the many initiatives we have in ACWR. We are trying to find a very strategic way to link people together to their local, national, regional communities. This is a map of membership for ACWR. Now, this is a very blown up version, but I think what this shows is we're so focused in our basement working on our collections that we're not thinking about what is possible. And I would say we don't have to just reach out to our colleagues in women archives, but women religious archives, but what are the archivists in our community, our local universities, what are they doing? We all have to accession, we all have to process, we all have to digitize. Those standards are the same. It doesn't matter what content you're working on. So there are a lot more people in our vicinity that we can go for support than I think what we often consider. Colleges, universities, dioceses, donors, communities, and collectors are all resources to us. Smart funding. As I mentioned, I come from a background in corporate archiving. One of the things that I think we often think of when we think of the archive is it's a soft investment. And I would argue, I would not disagree with that statement, but I would say there are ways to defray the cost of your budget. There are creative solutions. I've reached out to development in a number of ways. I have a yearbook project with them, a duplicate yearbook project, and they offer up duplicate yearbooks and they get donations for those yearbooks. When I think there is an opportunity and there's an opening, if I have a patron who's asked me for a lot of content and we have a good relationship back and forth, maybe they're a donor, I will just simply make an offering and say, do not feel obligated, but this is an option if you would like to donate. So there's a lot of ways to help offset the cost and beef up your budget. If you have a project that is beyond your budget for the year, reach out to development and ask them to create an angel fund for that project. Maybe somebody out there will help buy those 100 boxes that you need. Monetizing legacy content. This is something else that I think we often don't think about. Auctioning off artwork, or one of our sisters who was an artist, we have reprinted her artwork on greeting cards, which we sell in our local conventions center gift shop. So there's all kinds of really outside of the box solutions that, again, if you have more runway that, you can engage in some of these additional ideas. And I know leadership loves this because this is us being creative and thinking about how we can make the archive more relevant and less in the basement and less overwhelming and full of stuff, but it is viable, it's alive. Grant projects are always a good one, of course, and then engaging with consortiums to share expenses or even share staffing models. Maybe hire an archivist who works, in 4 different places for a year, a project archivist who rotates around. Sister volunteer staffing models, interns, Sister Sharon talked a great deal about that, collaborating with local institutions, loan out an archivist, we talked about that, and a SWAT team approach. I've seen this done where local archivists will get together, swoop in and help a sister archivist out. And then of course you can always hire a consultant. So there's all kinds of, I think, very creative solutions to move forward and to ready your collection for the next step. Okay, these are our closing thoughts. Thanks for hanging in with us, everybody. Okay, one of the smartest ways I've ever heard anybody talk about the value of an archive was by Eileen Markey, which many of you know is a journalist. We brought her on in January for a keynote speaking engagement. She says the archive is much more than a funeral project. And I argue it is the last remaining department. So as all the other departments start to diminish and need less resources and footprints and office space, the archive actually increases by every time a sister passes away. Our collection gets bigger, our needs are greater. And so what are we doing today to get ourselves ready for that reality? When in fact, the archive holds the charism, the story, the vision, the legacy of this community. Next. The archive is a soft investment. It is the place where we practice daily risk management, legal issues, confidentiality. It's the place for legacy building, and it could be a place where, we could improve monetary returns to help defray the cost of what it costs to preserve the archive. Lastly, what I am most excited about, even though it is a stark reality, is that this opportunity allows this professional community to pioneer and create roadmaps that have never been created before. So how do we do this? Well, I hope I've made it clear, we've made it clear that leaders and archivists need to work together. That's the only way we're going to have a robust program that's going to live on into perpetuity. Sister Sharon, can you take it away from there?
Sister Sharon, can you unmute, please?
Have to be overwhelming if it's done right. Executing a smart and radical approach will yield precise solutions in staffing, resources, and partnerships. With strategic planning and leadership support, the archive can serve as an extension of congregational charism, mission, and ministry. And lastly, futuring together is predicated on a simple truth. A successful archival program is rooted in the core relationship between the archivist and leadership. Amen.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Sister Sharon. This was wonderful and really, I think, provides a very practical roadmap for many of our archivists and leaders. We will open it up for questions from the group. I know that there are some in the chat. So let me start with, we have one for Sister Sharon. So when you were working with Nadia at Santa Clara, what kinds of parameters and specifications have you discussed with Nadia?
Several of the things relate to finances. Is there an expectation that the congregation will have some kind of endowment to continue the collection there? It's going to be the final legal papers. Are they being transferred to them completely? Does the congregation retain some properties? What can we take? For example, if you happen to see in the slide of our heritage room, we had our foundress's desk. Well, it worked fine in the heritage room. Santa Clara was not open to taking a big desk. So it's a matter of what can be taken. Also, does it all have to go at once, or can it come in various phases as you get them finished? So it will depend on each repository. And we know now there are a lot of them developing: Boston College, St. Mary's, Cleveland, Santa Clara. So it's important to work directly with the person where you're going to be sending your repository.
And Sister, as a follow-up to that question, after you made the decision to donate to Santa Clara, when and how did you inform your congregation and sisters?
We informed them probably right away. We, as you know, we're a small community, so it's more like a family. Everybody knows everybody and everybody knows everybody's business. And so we did not keep that a secret. And we had been talking about it in our 9-year futuring plan, that we would be moving our archive someplace. We just didn't know where. So we gave the community time to settle in on that.
Okay, and just a note in the chat, the PowerPoint will be made available after the presentation. So anyone who would like to take that and hint, hint, share it with your leadership or talk with the other department leaders, that would be very helpful. I don't see any hands raised. Are there any other questions or comments before we conclude this afternoon? Any final thoughts from Lisa or Sister Sharon?
Well, it looks like we have a hand raised.
Do we have a hand?
Margaret Mary?
Yes, Sister.
Me, yeah. You can hear me?
Mhm.
I have been in touch with Santa Clara with Nadia, and it has been very helpful. I have also used the ACWR mentors because it's hard to prioritize exactly what should be done. And we do not have yet, I am not a professional. I've done courses and webinars, but they all told me that it's important to really focus in, I think you've said this, on exactly where your archives are going. And we have maybe 10 years, I'm not sure, but we're small here in Southern California. And they said, I would love to have a professional archivist working with me right now, because it's hard. It's hard to know, and it's very time consuming. I've had volunteers, I've had sisters, but it's slow. So they all said, no, it would be better, first of all, to focus in on where archives are going to go. Because if you hire a professional archivist now, you might not have it clear what they should be doing. Because if they do this and that, and Santa Clara or wherever you're going to go does not want that done, they want it done another way, it would be better to focus in first on the transfer and then have a clear picture before you actually hire and pay a professional. So I think that's an important part. And I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
I would just second that, Margaret Mary. It's because I have found every repository does have little differences. And we don't want to, recreate the wheel too many times. The other thing, Lisa brought this up, and I think it is important, that at some point to connect with your diocesan or archdiocesan archives, just to see what is in there about your community. And you might be surprised. I was very surprised when I checked with ours. But I think it's a good idea because there might be some things that the archdiocese or the diocese would like in terms of it. And maybe it's a duplicate of something you have, but at least you don't want to be forgotten in the diocese or diocese where you've served for so many years.
Thank you. Sister Mary?
Yes, I want to say that another side of the advice to not hire a professional. I found by hiring a professional a couple of years ago, we've actually, I think, saved a lot of money and time. I guess the decision to hire a professional would depend upon what kind of condition your archives are in. So by hiring a professional, I think we are really headed into the right direction for whatever is going to happen next. So another option would be to hire a consultant like Ellen Pierce or someone else. Otherwise, as a non-professional and an untrained person, I think there's great danger that you could spend a lot of time, your congregation could spend enormous amounts of time and money, rearranging little tiny bits of pieces of things, getting back to what Lisa said about more product and less process. You could get, kind of hooked into taking paper clips off and taking paper, and little things that can wait. And you need to get a big picture. You need to get a schema and start figuring out, what you have to do. So I don't want to say for sure what a person should do, but give some thought to at least getting a consultant, if not a professional archivist, depending on where you are and how much time you have. But I'm so happy with our person we hired that we're now in the direction that we need to go in. But I spent, as many of the sister archivists are not trained, I spent a long time, a lot of time and effort and energy doing, and some of it, I hope not too much, is irreparable damage. So just think about that and talk to somebody about it, like a mentor from the ACWR. I just want to put that in there.
Thank you, Sister Mary. And just some concluding thoughts. We have a lovely comment in the chat from Sister Tessa that says the relationship between leadership and archives for her community has been a strength that has brought life and hope for our now and for our future. And I think certainly one thing we can take away from this webinar today is that you're not alone. You have support, you have friends, establish those relationships, and just make a great plan moving forward. So thank you both, Sister Sharon and Lisa, for this wonderful presentation. Their contact information was included on the webinar, so if you have more questions or want to chat with either of them, please feel free to reach out. Thank you all for attending today.